We're going to still stick with hockey. Of course, injuries happen, they come and go. But it's really tough if you're the New York Islanders with the recent MRI that happened to Jonathan Tavares. Turns out, serious knee injury, out for the season. And that's got to be frustrating for Garth Snow and the rest of the management for the New York Islanders. So I want to ask you guys, does this type of scrutiny jeopardize the NHL going back to the Olympics in 4 years' time? Because of these injuries, they're not being insured, and Garth Snow is asking, hey guys, is the IIHF going to pay us for losing a guy like him and our season ticket holders and their fan base, right?
Yeah. I think it's going to come down to the players. I think the players have some of the power here in terms of do they want to go. You talk to them, it's just right after the Olympics, yeah, we want to go back to, 2018, we want to go. Maybe after some time thinking about it and knowing where they are in 2018, they might have a little bit of change of heart. But it is difficult, and I think part of the NHL's issue is the money sharing of this, and I think money's another big piece of it. If things don't change there, the owners all get a say, but it'll be pretty tough or interesting to see if the NHL says no. Will the KHL say no? And now how does that balance things out? There'll be some pressure.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see if we go back to the original amateur movement. KHL likes to say they're comparable to the NHL. We kind of found that out at the Olympics that it isn't. Yeah. 2 weeks away, and the rinks closed down for 2 weeks. That's revenue out of the pocket of the National Hockey League. I know they make it up with the second half of the schedule, but at the same time, you lose a Tavares. Say if Toronto lost Phil Kessel for the rest of the season, you don't think the media in Toronto would be just a little upset that they lost Phil Kessel for the rest of the season? But because it's...
They were upset with him playing for Team USA in the first place.
But it's the New York Islanders. They're kind of a forgotten stepson down in New York. They don't really care. They're going to move to Brooklyn. They're still loose from there. But really, as a general manager, and I lost a player not playing for my team for the rest of the season, I would blow a gasket. That would not be acceptable. As a fan, love to see him come back, but I think it's going to come down to the owners and dollars.
Yeah. Scott Boras, speaking of dollars, this is a great segue. Scott Boras, Major League Baseball agent, has a lot of great high-profile guys, Bryce Harper, Max Scherzer being a few names that he's under contract with. But guys, I want to ask you this. He started attacking Alex Anthopoulos and the Toronto Blue Jays ownership. He went more so after the ownership saying, they should release the purse strings because this is a team that makes a lot of money, or at least the company, Rogers Communications, makes a lot of money, but don't put it and invest it on the field, which they should. Do you agree with Scott Boras in his assessment of the Toronto Blue Jays' lack of purse strings and kind of attacking them that way?
Well, how come he didn't attack them last year?
Well, they spent a lot of money last year.
Well, exactly.
This year they didn't.
Well, they spent their load last year, and I think they learned from that let's kind of see what that develops this season. Boras has something to gain if Toronto spends money. Who's kidding who? He's an agent. He wants his cut. So if the Jays spend money on his players, he's going to make money. So he's upset the Jays aren't spending money.
There's currently nobody on the roster as we speak that's a part of Scott Boras or being represented by Scott Boras.
That's not by accident.
Yeah.
But in the future, I think he's looking out for future candidates and players that might come in.
He's a used car
handy.
salesman.
Yeah. But you got to tell me, Kevin, do you think he's right? I have no problem with this because I think the Blue Jays have kind of been foolish a little bit.
But the Jays are an organization he can attack. I don't think it was an attack solely on the Jays, but a few places.
Yeah.
And he picks the Jays because they've had a bad relationship that goes back into the 80s with some of the people that the Jays were approaching that were represented by Boras. The other thing that Boras does is a little bit different is in terms of the young kids that he represents coming up. Teams don't negotiate, talk to the kids and the families. It's right through Boras, whereas other agents are a little bit different that way. And that doesn't sit well with the Jays. It's never sat well with Beeston. I don't think, although he targeted the Jays, there's little harm for him to target the Jays because the Jays aren't a team that typically deals with Boras. If he went after some of these other teams, I think he's harming himself more than he is going after the Jays. I think he's got some issues with a few teams.
All right, well, I want to get to this. Home plate might be an issue for some teams right now. The new rule, the Busty Posey rule is what they're calling it after the 2011 collision he had that put him out for a season. Now, player safety, obviously the main reason they had something, but they didn't abolish home plate collisions entirely. They will have some, but the new experimental rule will prevent runners from targeting catchers, helping to avoid those recent collisions at the plate. But catchers are also not allowed to block the plate unless they have possession of the ball. Do you feel this is a good rule and something that will prevent further injuries?
Well, I certainly do. I think it's going to prevent injuries. And I mean, you want to protect your players, what you can do. To me, it's no different than the NFL changes some of the quarterback rules in terms of protecting the quarterbacks. I think you have to do that. For a while, it was just turning into a gong show at home plate, with catchers knowing their job. I wouldn't want to be a catcher with some of those things going on. But now with the rule changes, I think it's a little more fair. But it has to go both ways. Moving the catcher off the plate if he doesn't have the ball has to be done as well. Otherwise, there isn't anything. No other options for these guys coming in.
But
So
this could be also misinterpreted because the umpires could also rule and deem certain things to be either for or against the catcher or the player who's sliding at home. And that we've always had issues with umpires. I think this just creates even more of a problem.
Well, the bottom line for all this is you got to protect the players. You got to protect your investment, and that's what owners are looking at. You lose a buster for a season in San Francisco, that was huge to them. All-Star game back in the 70s. Pete Rose takes out a catcher there.
Ray Fosse
Never plays again. And that ended of his career. We're not just talking a season, we're talking a career. So you got to protect your players. Bottom line, doesn't matter what sport it is, protect.
Yeah. And baseball's a game of 1,000 rules, and interpretation runs on most plays. Every strike's an interpretation. Every out, those kinds of things are interpretive rules. So, yeah, there's a little bit more on the umpires. It does, but again, I don't think to a degree where we're going to see.
You look at the size of some of those players too. Some of those players are like a linebacker in the NFL. You have a 240 guy rounding third. You're catching it. You see him coming. It's like. I got to get out of the train tracks.
All right, we're going to get to a dominant performance here by the women's hockey team. Talk about the men winning gold. The women captured gold a little more dramatic than the men, down 2-0 with about 3.5 to play in the period or final period. Come back to score 2 quick goals and end up winning it in overtime. Now, this to me is probably one of the greatest games Canada's played women-wise. It was fantastic to watch. Newsroom was blowing up. It was absolutely amazing to see what happened. But does this win, or at least the viewership, the draw it brought in, does that say to, I don't know, the IOC, you know what, women's hockey should stay in the Olympics? Because there's a lot of talk with the dominance of Canada, and it's been Canada-US virtually every year with the exception of 2006. Maybe they should drop the sport for a while until it becomes more competitive.
Okay, first of all, the game was one of the best hockey games I've ever seen. But second of all, it's still just 2 countries in that event. The rest of them, there's U.S. and Canada, and then there's a drop to everybody else. So when they went into the Olympics, they didn't want to see that. But when they finished the Olympics, that's exactly what they saw. So the sport of women's hockey is still a 2-country race, and until that changes, it's going to be debated whether or not that should be part of the Olympics.
But should it be? Yes or no?
I don't think it should be.
I give the IOC credit, or I guess the IHF credit for the way they tiered the teams in terms of their pool play. They wanted to avoid the 21-0 games or the 10-0 games, and for the most part they did that by putting the stronger 4 countries in one pool and the weaker 4 countries in one pool, and then the top 2, of course, crossed over and that. But it's difficult. I think the answer in terms of should it continue to be an Olympic sport is going back to those countries, their governing bodies, and saying what are you going to be doing to improve the game. Haley Wickenheiser flat out asked Tretiak, what are you guys doing to improve your game? How much money are you putting into this? He didn't have a real good answer from my understanding, and that's where, if the countries aren't, then maybe you got to shut it down. Or have a best of 7. 2 countries, best of 7, It's that, because it was a truly exciting hockey game. It was amazing.
All right, guys, we're going to take a quick commercial break. When we return, we're going to have over-under next.